The sun rose over Abuja's gleaming skyline, the light bouncing off the chrome and glass of Nexus Towers like a beacon of modern ambition. From my office on the 30th floor, I looked down at the pulsing arteries of the tech district, streams of cars, buzzing motorbikes, and hurried pedestrians who carried the weight of dreams and deadlines alike. I, Idris, the innovator Bello, was the architect of this empire, Quantum Leap Technologies. A company born from nothing but a stubborn dream and the obsessive fire in my chest. Every fiber of my being demanded perfection, and my company was a reflection of that. Every line of code reviewed twice. Every design scrutinized. Every presentation rehearsed until flawless. Perfection wasn't just a standard, it was survival. And survival required pressure. The corridors of Quantum Leap buzzed with subdued anxiety, though you wouldn't know it from the polished smiles people flashed when I walked by. Beneath the sheen, however, was fear. Fear of failure. Fear of not meeting my impossible expectations. "Good morning, sir," murmured Ada, one of my executive assistants, her voice low as if afraid volume itself might irritate me. "Morning," I said curtly, my eyes already on the day's agenda. Product launch meetings. Integration checks. Investor calls. Every second mattered. Yet even as I stalked through my kingdom, my gaze barely registered the figure in the corner of the hallway, a man in a faded blue jumpsuit, mop gliding silently over the marble floor. Silas. Our janitor. He was everywhere, yet nowhere. The kind of person you look through, not at. I didn't know then how dangerous that blindness was. The crown jewel of Quantum Leap was Project Chimera, an AI so advanced it could predict global market shifts with near-clairvoyant accuracy. Investors salivated at the thought. Media outlets called it the dawn of predictive capitalism. And me. I knew Chimera would immortalize me as a titan of technology. Launch day was weeks away, and the entire company was a hive of urgency. My engineers lived off caffeine and nervous energy, working 18-hour shifts under fluorescent lights. But one night, Chimera blinked. It started as a flicker, one of the predictive algorithms looping endlessly. Then, like dominoes, processes crashed. Screens filled with cascading error codes, red warnings that bled across monitors like digital wounds. "Sir, the system it's not stabilizing." Kwame, my head of engineering, exclaimed, his voice breaking for the first time since I'd known him. I leaned over the console, my reflection fractured in the glass. "Patch it. Roll back if you must." We tried. Nothing's working. The whole architecture is destabilizing. The words were knives. A catastrophic system failure. Months, years, of research, millions in investment, and my reputation, all unraveling before my eyes. My jaw clenched. "Failure," I said quietly, "is not an option." I retreated to my office, pacing like a caged animal. Through the panoramic windows, Abuja twinkled with promise, but none of it soothed me. If Chimera failed, I failed. And Idris Bello did not fail. Unseen, a mop glided across the hallway just outside. The following morning, the air inside Nexus Towers was brittle with tension. Engineers whispered in corners, their faces pale from sleepless nights. Chimera remained unstable. Yet amidst the chaos, one figure moved with unhurried calm. Silas, the janitor. He pushed his cart along the polished corridors, humming faintly under his breath. To most, he was invisible, blending into the background like wallpaper. But later, much later, I would discover footage from that night. In the grainy glow of CCTV cameras, as my brightest minds scrambled around their consoles, Silas stood outside the server room. His mop rested against the wall. His eyes were fixed, unblinking, on the blinking lights inside. He didn't enter. He didn't touch anything. He just stood there, silent, as if he could see something the rest of us couldn't. At the time, I didn't notice. I was too consumed by my empire's impending collapse. But the truth was already moving, quietly, through the shadow of a janitor. The next morning, something inexplicable happened. Chimera stabilized. One moment, the system teetered on the brink of collapse. The next, it was as if nothing had gone wrong. Processes smoothed out, algorithms hummed, predictions flowed once again. It was like watching a dying patient suddenly sit up, healthy and whole. Kwame burst into my office, his face pale. Sir. Chimeras online. The errors are gone. I froze. Gone? How? He shook his head. We don't know. We didn't fix it. It just healed itself. Healed itself. I repeated, skepticism lacing every syllable. Machines don't heal themselves, Kwame. I know. But that's what it looks like. Relief coursed through me, but it was poisoned by suspicion. Chimera wasn't built for self-healing, at least not at that scale. Something, or someone, intervened. I dismissed Kwame with a wave, but inside my chest, unease gnawed. A ghost had touched Chimera, and I needed to know who, or what, it was. The next night, long after the engineers had gone home, I returned to the surveillance room. My eyes scanned the footage of the catastrophic night. This time, I ignored the chaos of my engineers and focused on the margins, the shadows. Silas. Standing outside the server room. His posture was still, but his lips moved ever so slightly. On the audio feed, beneath the hum of servers and the frantic chatter of engineers, I caught it, a faint, low humming sound. Not words. A rhythm. Why would a janitor hum in front of the server room while my empire burned? Driven by unease, I scoured the building the next day. In a supply closet, behind buckets and rags, I found it, a small, battered diagnostic tool. Outdated, decades old. The kind of analog device long rendered obsolete by modern software diagnostics. It had no reason to be there. No one used tools like that anymore. No one except Silas. I held it in my hand, its weight heavier than steel. Suddenly, the invisible janitor wasn't invisible anymore. He was a question mark. A riddle. And I had to know the answer. The next week at Quantum Leap Technologies was strangely calm. Chimera ran smoothly, too smoothly, as if mocking the chaos of the week before. But instead of comfort, the stability gnawed at me. Silas was everywhere. I saw him pushing his cart down the halls, his mop gliding in steady strokes across polished floors. His presence, once invisible, now loomed like a quiet question in every corner. "Morning, Silas," I found myself saying one day, testing the sound of his name. He looked up, startled, as if unused to being addressed. His eyes were calm, deep-set, like wells untouched by time. "Morning, sir," he replied, voice low but steady. I studied him for a moment longer than usual, then moved on. But something had shifted. That night, I pulled employee records. Silas had been with the company since day one. Hired when we first rented a 3-room office in Garki, back when I was nothing more than a dreamer with a laptop and arrogance to match. He had been there through every triumph, every setback, every sleepless night. While I barked orders and demanded excellence, he quietly swept floors, changed light bulbs, emptied trash bins. He was the silent witness to my empire. And now, I suspected, its secret guardian. One evening, long after the building emptied, I lingered. From the shadows of the parking lot, I watched Silas finish his shift. He rolled his cart into the janitorial closet, locked up, and stepped out into the night. I followed. He moved with surprising swiftness for a man his age, weaving through the alleys behind Nexus Towers. The Abuja nightlife pulsed just blocks away, clubs thumping with bass, cars honking, street vendors calling, but Silas walked past it all, purposeful and quiet. At last, he stopped at a nondescript door set into a narrow alley wall. Faded paint. Rusted hinges. A place you'd walk by 1,000 times and never notice. He glanced around once, then slipped inside. I hesitated, curiosity warring with caution. Finally, I approached and pressed my ear to the door. A faint crackle met me, electric, alive. I pushed the door gently. It creaked. What I saw froze me in place. The room was a time capsule. Not a dingy janitor's hideout, but a meticulously organized workshop. Shelves lined with vintage circuit boards. Oscilloscopes from the 1970s. Soldering irons glowing faintly. Schematics spread across the table like blueprints of forgotten worlds. And at the center sat Silas. His sleeves rolled, glasses perched on his nose, hands steady as he worked on a circuit board beneath the golden pool of a desk lamp. It was artistry, not labor. His brow furrowed in focus, his movements deliberate, graceful even. For a moment, I simply watched, hidden in the shadows. The man I thought a ghost of hallways was, in truth, an engineer of a vanished age. The hum returned, the same low, steady tune I'd heard on the security footage. Silas hummed as he soldered, the melody rising and falling with the flicker of sparks. I stepped forward. The door squeaked. He looked up. Our eyes met. No panic, no anger, just calm recognition, as though he'd been expecting me all along. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Bellow," Silas said softly, his voice carrying the weight of quiet authority. "I could say the same about you," I shot back, though my voice lacked the edge I intended. He gestured around the workshop. "This is my space. My peace." I moved closer, scanning the shelves, the old textbooks, the diagrams of analog systems long extinct. "This doesn't look like peace. This looks like obsession." He chuckled faintly. "We're not so different then." I froze at that. "Tell me about Chimera," I demanded. "What did you do?" He set down the soldering iron carefully, as if it were fragile glass. His eyes held mine, unwavering. "You won't believe me. Try me." Silas sighed, folding his hands. "I noticed something that night. A harmonic interference, an electromagnetic resonance in the server room. Subtle. Invisible to your modern diagnostics. But I've seen it before. Long ago, when circuits hummed differently." I frowned. "And you fixed it?" "No," he corrected. "I adjusted the environment. The machine healed itself once the noise was gone." His humility unnerved me more than arrogance would have. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't claiming genius. He was simply stating fact. I looked around again. This workshop was no hobby. It was a sanctuary of knowledge I didn't understand. "You're just a janitor," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He smiled faintly. "Caretaker. That's the word I prefer." I pulled a stool closer, the metal legs scraping the floor. "Start from the beginning. Explain it like I'm one of your engineers." For the first time, Silas hesitated. He studied me, as though weighing whether I was ready to listen. Finally, he leaned forward. "Your engineers live in a world of code and digital signals. But before that world, there was another. Analog. Physical. Machines that spoke not in binary, but in waves, hums, pulses. I grew up with those machines." He tapped the circuit board in front of him. When I heard Chimera's error hum, I recognized it. Not a bug. Not bad code. A resonance. The servers were being disrupted by a low-frequency interference, something your modern diagnostics overlooked because they weren't designed to hear it. "And you?" I asked. "I heard it," he said simply. "I adjusted the environmental dampeners in the server room, the ones everyone ignores. That calmed the resonance. Chimera stabilized." I sat back, stunned. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" His eyes softened. "Would you have believed me? A janitor with an old tool and older ears, claiming to solve what your brightest minds could not." The silence stretched between us. He was right. I wouldn't have believed him. Not then. Finally, I whispered, "You saved my company." He shook his head. "I saved Chimera. The company is yours to save, or lose." The words landed heavier than any lecture. The next morning, Chimera's dashboard glowed green across every metric. Investors cheered. My engineers, exhausted but triumphant, celebrated in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might wake the beast again. But I couldn't shake Silas's words. That evening, I summoned him to my office. The man shuffled in quietly, mop handle still in hand as if it were a shield. His presence was jarring against the glass and chrome perfection of my office. "Sit," I said. He hesitated, then lowered himself into the leather chair. "You said you recognized the resonance," I began. "Tell me how." Silas folded his hands in his lap. His eyes, dark and calm, seemed to pull me into another world. "In the old days," he said, "machines weren't silent. They sang. Each one had a voice, transistors humming, capacitors buzzing. You learned to hear them, to feel when one was out of tune." I frowned. "But technology has moved on. We've outgrown that. He smiled faintly. Outgrown, perhaps. Forgotten, certainly. But not erased. The old ways still live beneath the new. Sometimes the ghosts of analog still whisper in digital systems. You just don't listen anymore. His words struck like lightning. You fixed Chimera not with code, I said slowly, but with listening. Silas nodded. Sometimes the simplest truths hide beneath the noise. The irony was crushing. I had built an empire on the edge of tomorrow, yet it had been saved by yesterday. 4 days, I wrestled with what I had learned. I watched Silas as he moved through the building. He was unchanged, quiet as ever, blending back into the background. No one knew he had saved us. No one thanked him. And he preferred it that way. One afternoon, I cornered him in the janitorial closet. Why didn't you tell anyone what you did? He looked up from arranging supplies, his expression unreadable. Because it didn't matter. Didn't matter. My voice rose. You saved a multi-billion-dollar project. You saved my company. Silas's gaze was steady. I saved a machine from failing. Whether the company survives is not my place. His humility infuriated me. I thrived on recognition, on applause, on headlines that called me the innovator. And here was a man who had quietly done more than all my engineers combined, yet asked for nothing. Don't you understand what this means? I demanded. I understand perfectly, he said. But I also understand men like you, Mr. Bello. If I had spoken up, you would not have listened. And if you had, the credit would have broken me. I froze. He was right. The Idris Bello of 3 weeks ago would have dismissed him outright. His silence had been humility, yes, but also survival. The weight of gratitude sat heavy on my chest. One evening, after another long day of meetings, I summoned Silas again. This time, I had an envelope in hand. Inside was a bonus large enough to change his life. Take this, I said, sliding it across the desk. He didn't touch it. You've earned it, I insisted. Or perhaps you'd prefer a promotion. A managerial position? A corner office? Silas chuckled softly, shaking his head. I don't need those things. I leaned forward, frustrated. Then what do you want? His eyes met mine, unflinching. To keep doing my work. To take care of things. That's not enough. I snapped. Not after what you did. It is for me, he said simply. I stared at him, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. I had spent my life chasing power, wealth, recognition. And here was a man who held the wisdom of ages, yet sought none of it. I realized then, this was a debt I could never repay, because he refused to collect it. Silas's intervention changed more than Chimera, it changed me. For the first time in years, I walked the halls of Quantum Leap and really saw the people who worked there. The receptionist who greeted visitors with warmth. The security guard who knew every employee by name. The cafeteria staff who fed an army of engineers at all hours. They were invisible, like Silas. And I had been blind. At the next board meeting, I shocked everyone. We are restructuring, I announced. Kwame frowned. Restructuring? Sir, Chimera. Chimera is fine, I cut him off. But the company isn't. We've built a culture of fear. That ends now. I outlined mentorship programs pairing senior engineers with junior staff. I proposed cross-departmental workshops where ideas could flow freely. I even suggested a new innovation lab, one that combined cutting-edge digital tech with vintage analog systems to honor forgotten wisdom. And who will run this odd little experiment? One board member sneered. Silas, I said firmly. The room erupted in murmurs, incredulous laughter, outright disbelief. Our janitor, someone whispered. Yes, I said, steel in my voice. Our janitor. The ripples began there. Weeks later, the Innovation Lab opened on the ground floor of Nexus Towers. A space unlike any other in Abuja. Glass walls framed shelves of vintage machines, old oscilloscopes humming beside quantum processors, typewriters beside VR headsets. And at the center of it all stood Silas, mop still in hand, but now also a mentor, a guide. Employees wandered in curiously at first, skeptical. But slowly, they began to listen. "Sir," a young engineer asked him one day, holding up a malfunctioning circuit, "why does this keep overheating?" Silas peered at it, then smiled faintly. "It's breathing too fast. Slow it down. Add a resistor here." The boy frowned. "Breathing. Machines breathe," Silas said. "Not like us, but close enough. Listen to it." Within minutes, the problem was solved. Word spread quickly. Soon, staff from every department, finance, HR, design, came to Silas for advice. Not just about machines, but about solving problems, about perspective. I watched it all, humbled. My company, once a pressure cooker of fear, was transforming into a community of trust. Innovation blossomed in unlikely corners, born from collaboration instead of competition. For the first time, Quantum Leap wasn't just about technology. It was about people. And it began with a janitor's secret. Despite my attempts to keep Chimera's miraculous recovery quiet, whispers had a way of escaping walls. Investors, ever hungry for the scent of mystery, began to ask pointed questions. "What exactly happened during integration testing?" asked Mr. Langston, one of our most aggressive backers, his British accent clipped and suspicious. Kwame fumbled. Temporary instability, sir. It corrected itself." Langston raised a brow. "Corrected itself?" The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I jumped in. Quantum Leap doesn't dwell on problems, only solutions. Chimera works. That's all that matters. But they weren't satisfied. Rumors trickled through the company. A silent savior. A man who fixed the unfixable. When investors visited Nexus Towers for a tour of the new innovation lab, they found themselves face-to-face with Silas. He was showing a group of junior engineers how to balance analog resistors with digital sensors, his mop propped casually against the wall. Langston leaned close to me. "That's your janitor, isn't it?" "Yes," I admitted stiffly. "And you've put him in charge of this?" He gestured to the lab, where employees were buzzing with excitement. "Yes," I said again, this time with conviction. Langston studied me, then the room, where laughter and debate mingled with the whir of machines. "Humph," he muttered. "Odd strategy." But I noticed something in his eyes. Intrigue. Investors didn't just buy technology. They bought stories. And this was a story like no other. In the months that followed, Quantum Leap changed. The suffocating air of perfectionism lifted. My employees no longer looked like prisoners on a death march. Instead, they collaborated freely, mistakes seen not as failures but as opportunities. The cafeteria buzzed with cross-departmental conversations. HR clerks discussed algorithms with engineers. Designers debated aesthetics with security guards. And in the center of it all was Silas, still wearing his janitor's uniform, still mopping floors, yet also dispensing wisdom in his quiet way. One evening, I overheard him talking to a group of interns. "You see, machines are like people," he said. "If you ignore the small sounds, the little signals, you miss the warnings. Learn to listen, not just to the loud voices, but to the quiet ones too." It hit me like a sermon. That was what I had missed all along, not just in Chimera, but in my company, in my life. I had listened only to the loud voices, investors, media, my own ego. I had ignored the quiet ones. And now, those quiet voices were transforming Quantum Leap. The stock price soared, yes, but it wasn't just numbers. It was confidence, creativity, purpose. We weren't just making products anymore. We were making culture. Despite the growing attention, Silas remained unchanged. He refused interviews. He ignored requests for podcasts, panels, exposés. To every invitation, his answer was the same, "I'm just a caretaker." Yet inside Quantum Leap, he became legend. Employees sought him out for advice, technical, personal, even philosophical. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was always with a clarity that cut through noise. One night, I found him in the lab surrounded by engineers. They were laughing, not stressed, laughing. I leaned against the doorway, unseen, and listened. "Sir," a young developer asked, "why didn't you ever become a CEO or a professor? You're smarter than all of us combined." Silas smiled, eyes twinkling. Because power and titles are noisy. And I prefer the quiet. The group laughed, but I didn't. The truth of it pierced me. Power and titles were my oxygen. But for Silas, they were suffocation. I realized then that his legacy wasn't in any invention or patent. It was in the culture he had seeded, one of humility, listening, and unseen strength. Years passed. Quantum Leap became a giant, its products shaping industries worldwide. But in quiet moments, I still thought about the night Chimera nearly collapsed. What if Silas hadn't been there? The billions we almost lost weren't just money. They were people's jobs, families, futures. They were my reputation, my dream. And it all teetered on the edge of my arrogance. I had believed perfection lived only in the cutting edge, the digital, the new. I had ignored the wisdom of the old, the unseen, the humble. That blindness had nearly cost me everything. Now, when journalists called me the innovator, the title rang hollow. Because the truth was harsher, I had been inches from ruin, saved not by my brilliance, but by the quiet observation of a janitor. I carried that knowledge like a scar. One late evening, long after the building emptied, I walked to the innovation lab. Silas was there, as always. He sat at his desk, glasses low on his nose, humming softly as he tinkered with a vintage transistor radio. "Still working?" I asked. He looked up, smiled faintly. "Still listening." I joined him at the bench, watching as his weathered hands soldered tiny wires with care. "You know," I said quietly, "you changed everything." He shook his head. "You changed. I only reminded you to look." I fell silent, humbled. The company was thriving, wealth beyond imagining. Yet none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was this man, this caretaker, who had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. "The secret you kept," I whispered. "It cost me billions in arrogance. But it gave me something more." He looked at me, eyes gentle. "And what's that?" "Perspective." Silas nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work. Years later, long after Quantum Leap had become a household name, I often returned to that lab. The world saw me as a visionary. But I knew the truth. My vision had been sharpened by someone unseen. Silas never sought recognition, never demanded payment. He remained the quiet caretaker, humming softly in the shadows. And his secret, the wisdom of humility, the power of observation, the value of the unseen, made us all richer. Not just in billions, but in ways money could never measure. The end.